On this week's video, we are doing a failure to launch about probably one of my most requested films to cover for this series. We're talking about Behind the Mask. This is a great little movie that seems to really set up a new horror franchise, a new horror villain, and just didn't go anywhere, much to the chagrin of pretty much anybody that has seen it. So let's take a look at the film and see if we can figure out why. So one of horror's most interesting villains debuted back in 2006 with Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon. It starts off in a familiar way with a young woman stalked by a masked man and then shifts to a found footage format. If you're not a found footage fan, you might be checking out right about now, but trust me, stick with it because it's worth it. It establishes us in a universe that states that Jason, Freddy, Chucky, and Michael Myers were all real and existed in the same continuity. Our host then tells us the backstory of another man vowing revenge named Leslie Vernon. He seems like a fairly normal guy, actually very charming, and explains a lot of the tropes of horror.
You have no idea how much cardio I have to do. It's ridiculous.
Why so much?
Well, you gotta be able to run like a freaking gazelle without getting winded. Plus, there's that whole thing of making it look like you're walking, and everybody else is running their asses off.
He has a friend that's supposed to be a retired slasher played by Herschel, and he's now married to one of his victims. Eugene is an unnamed classic killer, but in the original screenplay, he was meant to be Billy from Black Christmas, and has a lament configuration apparently. Who just leaves that sitting on a dresser? There's videos out there linking horror franchise together into one big universe, and this movie is usually the key to connecting them into one big world. I mean, I know the Bride of Chucky already kind of like linked in Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, and Halloween, and the Child's Play series into one universe. This movie kind of cements that, and then brings in the Black Christmas movies. And then actually in the Hatchet films, Leslie Vernon is mentioned as a real guy too, so I guess they're all in this same big horror universe. Zelda Rubinstein is here in one of her final roles, and she reveals Leslie's backstory, and then we get our first look at his costume, and it's overalls, a scythe, and this distorted mask. We also meet Robert Englund, dressed as Loomis, and he's after Leslie. They refer to him as an Ahab, someone who's obsessed with hunting the killer. He reveals that Leslie Vernon is actually Leslie Mancuso, letting us know that we have no clue how much of what he shared so far is actually real. They get everything set up in an old farmhouse, and eventually his plan comes to fruition. A group of kids comes up to party, and everything goes pretty much how Leslie expected it to, following the format and tradition of a typical horror film, which again, in this universe, are all real. He starts killing, which makes the documentary crew chicken out, and then the movie shifts. It drops the faux documentary style and becomes a standard narrative movie as we finally meet the other two characters behind the cameras, and they try to stop Leslie. But when it's revealed that Kelly isn't a virgin and then dies, it's apparent that she's not Leslie's actual final girl. Taylor realizes that she's been the final girl all along, and everything, including the documentary, was all part of his plan. Doc Halloran shows up, and even his name is a horror callback, and soon it's a final showdown between Taylor and Leslie, and she manages to kill him using the exact method that he had laid out for her earlier. The problem is,
All the obvious weapons right up front, I've sabotaged.
Taylor survives, as does cameraman Doug and the doc, and if you stick around through the credits, you'll see that Leslie did as well, having faked his death. I mean, although those burns look real, so I'm guessing that her setting things on fire may not have been in his plan. So if Leslie's still alive, why didn't he have any more entries? Well, that's a good question, although in a way, I'm okay with it. Leslie's story was about deconstructing the typical horror film format and cliches, and I'd hate to see him just become one. As it is, the last half hour of the film falls into some of the traps of the very films it's parodying, but with the right concept, there'd definitely be room for more. Behind the Mask was pretty acclaimed with a 76% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and it won a number of awards from film festivals, and it is very well loved by the horror community. Audiences would most likely enjoy more of Leslie's stories, and the film's co-writer David Steve said that he had a definite idea on where to take the character next, and if he were to do another horror movie, it would be to return to Leslie Vernon. Back in 2017, the film's director Scott Glosserman said that a script existed for a sequel, but he was hesitant about it since it was a commentary on horror at the time and now feels a bit dated. It appears as if it was created during the Saw and Hostel torture porn period of horror and doesn't capture what's going on in horror today. He said that he'd still want to make the film though and isn't sure that he'd want to update the script, leaving it as a period piece possibly. Nathan Basil, Leslie Vernon himself, said that he would love to play the character again, but only if the script were as good as the original, and that anything less would be damaging to the character's legacy. Back in 2018, it looked like things were going forward with Before the Mask, The Return of Leslie Vernon, which was described as a sequel, prequel, remake, and apparently got to a table read, but nothing further happened, although it was released as an independent comic book series. It looks like finance is the biggest reason for nothing happening, because although the original was a revealed cult classic, it hasn't exactly been extremely profitable. It brought in a mere $70,000 in limited release, and although it was only 72 theaters, it averaged about $500 per theater in its opening weekend. To compare that, Hannibal Rising was in its 6th week of release, considered a huge bomb, pulled back to 88 theaters, and was still pulling in about $900 per theater. So studios weren't exactly chomping at the bit to make another one, and I guess fans weren't doing much bit chomping themselves, as a Kickstarter campaign also failed. Glosserman and Steve tried it back in 2012 looking for $450,000, but only raising $183,000. Add all that up, and it looks like we've seen the last of Leslie, unless you check out that comic book series and the character is either in hiding, locked up, or dead. So there you have it. It's just one movie, sadly, or possibly thankfully. I simply adore this movie. It's a fantastic horror film. If you love horror movies, this is one to check out, because it's basically makes fun of a lot of the things that we love as horror fans, and it pokes fun at all of the silly things about horror movies that everyone likes to call out. This movie does call them out, and it does it in an interesting way that actually makes it part of the plan. This is all part of Leslie's whole scope, and it kind of stretches it out to sit there and think. When you see like the guy behind the mask, it actually makes you wonder how it reflects into other movies. Like, is Jason just a regular dude, and then the hockey mask and everything like that is just a persona he puts on when it becomes kill time? That's one of the questions that this movie raises, and it's great. Whether or not that would extend into other films, I'm not totally sure of, because again, I think that the movie did say everything it was going to say, and I'm not totally positive that there was more. I am in the camp. I know that one of the big criticisms of the movie is once it switches out of found footage format that it becomes a less interesting movie, and I kind of agree in that it kind of becomes more of a cliched horror movie by the last half hour or so. I still think it's a lot of fun, and I still think it's enjoyable, but I just don't think it is the genre smashing great bit of interesting psychological character study that the first part of the movie is. Leslie is the most entertaining character in this movie, and when you take him off of the screen, which you do in the last half hour, it took it away from me. But overall, this is a great movie. If you haven't seen it, you should check it out. That's about it for this week's video. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know down below if you want to see more of Leslie Vernon. I guess if you did, you could have kicked into that Kickstarter, but it's a little late now. Let me know what you think of the movie in general, what you thought of this video. Like, comment, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Check out the patrons, because these guys help keep the channel going, and I'll see you very shortly for another great video. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.